Aloha everyone! Welcome to this brief workshop on the four-step process in customizing, structuring, or modifying the learning environment to best meet a student's needs. Now within this four-step process, it's really accumulation of the prior units that we've covered. So I wanted to briefly go over each of the steps and then talk about how this really works synonymously within a tutoring session. So the first step in this four-step process is the assess step. Now this assess stage is synonymous with assessing the learner needs covered in Unit 2. Of course, we remember that during this step, you're trying to figure out where the student is having trouble or what they need help with. So remember, when identifying learner needs, you should utilize the three-step process, which is discover, validate, and classify. This always happens at the beginning of any tutoring session. So after we assess the learner's needs, the next step is to monitor. So after you've assessed the learner's needs and begin working on areas the student is struggling with, really the next step is to monitor the student. To do so, you should first listen and observe, then prompt the student using questions covered in Unit 3. Particularly, during this step, you need to prompt the student using the Socratic method of questioning and then listen and observe the student. When using the Socratic method of questioning, consider asking questions like what the student knows or maybe the problem areas for the students. Just to remind you, there are 5 possible methods for using the Socratic method: determining problem areas, determining what a student knows, helping a student determine the right answer, seeing if a student can apply new skills, or clarifying something which is not clear. When a student is working through a problem, draft, or maybe a learning activity, listen to what the student is saying and then observe his or her body language. Students can really give lots of signals, both verbal and nonverbal, that a tutor should understand. If a student, for example, is slouching and looking down, this student might need a different approach, maybe compared to a more rigid student or a laid-back student. All right, so after we have assessed the student's needs and we've monitored the student with verbal and nonverbal cues, as well as asking them strategic questions, the next step is to appropriately choose a tutoring method. So, within this method, you're trying to really determine the best tutoring approach to take to enhance the experience of a student. So after guiding the student with questions and, of course, again identifying his or her verbal and nonverbal communication, really the next step is to choose a tutoring approach. To decide which approach to use, refer to the different examples. So perhaps if the student needs some encouragement in his or her ability to get through an assignment, then maybe you should use the ally method. Now, if the student is wanting maybe some exam help or wanting to know if his or her understanding is correct, then maybe consider using the learner method. Does the student need help looking at the bigger picture, concept, or problem or issue? If so, maybe consider using the commentator method. Whichever the case, tutoring methods are very helpful in trying to determine the best tutoring approach and also enhancing the experience of the student. All right, so now that we've gone through step 1, step 2, and step 3, the last step is to really assist or implement. Now within this step, what you're focusing on doing is really implementing the method into or methods into the session to structure the learning environment. Assisting and or implementing will look different for different students. You might be called upon to scaffold information for the student and implement activities like modeling, breaking problems into smaller tasks, sharing your own tips, or something else, as covered in Unit 1. Or you might be called to be more of an active listener and focus on just being an audience member for a student who just needs to talk out his or her ideas to you. You also might be called to provide encouragement and offer a gentle approach to a tutoring session through offering feedback or suggestions. Really, the assisting stage can encompass a variety of different tutoring tools, methods, and strategies. It's essentially the stage where you're doing something. This doing can come in the forms of listening, assigning a project to a student, modeling a problem, asking a question, and so on and so forth. Essentially, the neat aspect of this process is that it really kind of gets the gears moving. It's a cyclical process, but it also can involve jumping across different steps. Ideally, when you're starting a tutoring session, you should always start with step 1. Move to step 2, transition to step 3, and then end in step 4. However, as you're working with a student, you might find yourself jumping back and forth between step 4 and step 2, or maybe step 2, step 3, and step 4, depending on what the student needs are. Really, in tutoring, it basically comes down to a tutor's discretion in what might best help the student. Now, this can seem vague and maybe a little terrifying, but a good tutor will know how to move about each step to best assist a student. And so we're providing you with practice and training to help get you familiar with these different steps, so then you can begin to practice and implement these steps within your tutoring session. I hope this helps, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in our face-to-face meeting, where we're really going to start implementing this process within a face-to-face tutoring scenario.